Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm continuing on with my Goosebumps The Vanishing episode reviews. And to close it out with the individual reviews before I get into my season review as a whole, we have the final episode, which has some consternation with the name as well. On the streaming services and various websites, it's literally just called Episode 8, which I'm going to put in the descriptor of this video for the time being until it potentially updates to supposedly the real episode title of the final episode that I guess has been circulating, called Invasion of the Body Squeezers. Now I'm going to say this up front. I've said this in other reviews and I'm going to say it here again, that I went into this season with an open mind. I wanted to judge just the source material that we're given and not necessarily the companies behind making the material and my opinions about those in question, I should say. So if you're expecting me just to hate this show because Disney or Sony made it, I'm not going to do that. I know the show is not for me, and it's not really something I want out of the series, but because I'm a Goosebumps fan, I'm covering it. And if you feel that way and you don't like me for that, I'll drop a like and a heart on your comment if you disagree with me, and I'll move on with my day because I just don't care. All said and done, right? So anyways, this episode, this was the finale. This was supposed to be the send-off to the season. There's a lot of side plot stuff building and that has been brewing, and you expect to see some payoff with that. And also, we're getting down to the wire with the core storyline of the 4 missing teenagers from 1994, and the whole thing with the black goo that started making creatures inside of Dr. Brewer's basement, and all of that stuff that's built onto that core part of the story. It's supposed to have a release point, because we learned a lot of the backstory about the military bunker and all of that in this episode, and the episodes prior as well. And this is supposed to send the story home in a climactic finish. And I say keyword supposed to, because in my opinion, I think this finale, kind of like the previous season, kind of fell on its face a little bit. And to me, this episode really does show that, in hindsight, there's a lot of easy remedies this show could be making to make it better that it hasn't really put its finger on the pulse yet to do. And I'll get into that in the season review of it, because I do want to say my piece about this episode in particular on its own. So I'm going to do so now before we get too ahead of ourselves. So, episode 8, as I'm going to call it, it basically picks up from the ending of episode 7, where the teenagers have been put into the bunker by the gray-haired woman who's revealed to be a doctor and behind this government experiment that goes back to 1969 that was a failure. And the government experiment essentially involved a containment of this alien spacecraft that had crash landed on Earth, specifically on the island where Camp Night Moon was, and the disappearance of the Camp Night Moon counselor, and all of that. You learn the backstory in the previous episode. But the teens are now down there by themselves trying to figure out what to do when they make their way down the staircase after being left behind to essentially survive down there until they can figure out how to get Dr. Brewer out of the situation he's in. They are armed with some serum that the doctor did give them to help them, reactivate their father and cure him of what's going on. But they didn't really tell them how to handle everything else. So the teens immediately notice that there's a room with the spacecraft underneath them, and they notice these pods all around the bottom on the floor that have people that have been taken, I guess, by the spacecraft and or the black substance, I should say. And when they venture down there, they notice that the missing teenagers are over off to the side, and then they find Dr. Brewer. And Devin and Cece immediately want to go save their dad, and they do so. by putting the serum into the pod and making him fall down after the pod dissipates, and they wrap him in a blanket and get him caught up to speed on what's happened, right? But before that, I kind of skimmed the surface in episode 7 because this is kind of a thing that happened there. We see a scene with Dr. Brewer kind of having like a vision of sorts while he's stuck in this weird dimension where he's kind of trapped in his basement. I guess it's because the sentient black goo has his mind encased while he's in this pod, and maybe he's conscious throughout all of this, but a part of himself can't literally be there because it's been taken and put into a pod. It's very confusing and metaphorical, but we get a sense after he snaps out of it, and once he realizes that what's around him, he realizes that the kids that went missing in 94 have been down here the whole time, and he feels tremendous guilt that he didn't try looking hard enough soon enough and all of that to help save them. And he's wondering how he was able to get out, but not the others. And the kids tell him that they used the last of the serum on him. And the dad's trying to get caught up to speed about the information that the teens know. And they essentially drop the bombshell saying that, well, the spacecraft needs to be put into some sort of stasis again. And if it does so, it's theoretically going to free who's ever in the pod down below. And the dad realizes that that's probably the best bet to save his brother, and he feels compelled to do so. But at the same time, they also need to put it into stasis so they can buy some time to get out. The problem is that since the power is turned on to the facility down below, there's no way out. But the teens did remember one aspect that happened in the very first episode of the season, where Trey, when he was at the bunker messing around with the electronics, he short-circuited the electronic board that supplied the power to the door, and it's, hooked up to a fail-safe where if the power shuts off or short circuits, the door will open to free everybody so they're not stuck down there. And the kids realize that, hey, that should be the plan that we roll with. So it comes to a point where they have to establish that a plan to where they can do that, but also put the ship in stasis and potentially save the others, right? So it comes down to a point where Dr. Brewer takes it upon himself when the situation becomes more clear to him that this is going to have to be a thing. He takes one of the old doctor suits that was left there since 1969 and puts it on to go down below to brave the spaceship area and hook up this machine that is in theory going to put the ship back in stasis. But when he tries to do so, it causes the ship to kind of awaken, and they're running out of time, and the teens realize that they have to, handle the electronic situation. And of course, Trey, like before, he short circuits a board that causes a malfunction to the security system, and the teens make a break for it to the stairs and try to escape. But before they can do that, they realize that Dr. Brewer has to stay behind to keep the ship in stasis long enough for them to get out. But the time is running thin because there's a backup generator, as they find out when they get above, that is possibly going to kick back on and shut the door again. Well, to make a long story short, the teens make it out of the bunker, and perhaps Dr. Brewer does as well, but also now newly animated people that we thought weren't ever going to come back. And by people, I mean the 4 teens from the 94 disappearance. So once all the people are out, Detective Diaz has been trying to follow up and get caught up to speed on her own journey through this story by ending up at the bunker, trying to figure out what's going on with her daughter and all these teenagers that have, according to her, gone missing again. And when she comes there, she realizes that the teens are there, and it makes her freak out that she sees her high school boyfriend still the same age, right? So we get a cutaway to where the teens are being brought back to the Brewer household, and they're pretty much in culture shock because it's not the same world that they were living in 94. They've missed so much of their lives at this point that they kind of feel like aliens. And I don't know if this is supposed to be a metaphorical thing, but there is some fun humor here dealing with the teenagers and the brevity of it as they're watching modern streaming shows. And I think they're watching Love is Blind on Netflix. And Anthony's older brother, who is still the same 17-year-old age as he was when he disappeared, is like, wow, TV's really gone downhill. Kind of implying that maybe these teens don't really feel like they have much to live for in this time that they're growing up in now, which is kind of sad. But we see that the teens kind of want to get out, and they don't want to be cooped up. They've been in a pod for 30 years. They need to have some sort of release of just being stuck in that. So they decide to do a buddy system thing with the core cast of teens here, where a couple of them branch off with each other to go do different things together. And almost immediately, something feels off. Something feels very, very off. And beginning with that, we have Dr. Brewer having a certain interaction, let's say, with the gray-haired doctor, where he wants more answers with Detective Diaz. And they end up back at her bunker because they have a lot of questions for her and they want some answers. And she's there with her own father, with her own dad that was supposedly also taken by the ship and whatnot back in 69, right? And somehow he's gotten out, but we have no idea how the guy's gotten out, but he's there. And the daughter seems to be happy that her dad is back, but he doesn't seem to be happy that he's back. He's like, you shouldn't have done this. I'm not me, blah, 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 blah. And Dr. Burr and Detective Diaz realize that whatever this dad is, it's not really the dad. It's actually some sort of alien offspring that has assimilated into the dad, right? And the doctor is mortified when the realization hits that it really isn't her dad anymore. And then the sinking realization sets in for the adults that, hey, if he's not who he is, then the kids that we brought back aren't who they are. And we watch them one by one change into these alien creatures, some off screen, some on screen. And the characters in question quickly deal with them in the best ways they can, manage. And this, of course, culminates to them going back to the military bunker again to hopefully have them go back to the ship, because of the realization that they come to is that perhaps they're not bad creatures. They just want the ship to be taken out of the ground so possibly they can go home or go back to wherever they came from. So the climax of the episode and the finale really is that all the main characters in question end up back at the bunker. Specifically, Detective Diaz and Dr. Brewer, because mild spoiler here, or I guess a major spoiler. Like I've said in my other reviews, you're better off watching these episodes before you listen to my review so you get what I'm coming from, right? We see essentially the kids have been taken by these creatures and brought down below to join the hive. And Dr. Brewer and Detective Diaz are forced to kind of save the day. They're forced to save the day and save the kids. And they possibly manage to do so in a very confusing way. And this is where the story kind of ends off at, is that once Dr. Brewer is able to free the ship then decides to, kind of give back the people it's taken over the years, but in a weird metaphysical kind of way. He's being telepathically communicated with by his brother, who's essentially dropped a bombshell on him saying that they don't belong in the time that they're currently in, so they're going to go with the aliens along with all the other people that have been taken and blah, 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 blah. But the teens were okay. Okay, right? And then, weirdly enough, as soon as the spaceship takes off and it's implied that all the other people got on board with them to leave, the story really quickly wraps up after that point, and everybody has a hug at the end. All the teens are back in Gravesend again. And then we get a twist ending involving a certain character, implying that things might not be over, right? And that's really all I can say about this episode in terms of plot, and that's all you can really expect out of episode 8 here. What a weird way to end this season. I was thinking that they're going to have at least some plot twists near the end, because this is a Goosebumps show. Goosebumps is known for plot twists. It's known for throwing a monkey wrench into the equation at times. But the way this episode resolved the entire main story here, it was kind of touching and emotional, and I really did feel that moment between Anthony coming to grips that his brother might be gone forever, and all these people that he's tried to save are too far gone. That's cool, and it kind of provides more stakes to the story, as if you get put into the pod, unless you have this serum that this doctor created to cure you, you're changed forever. This stuff has morphed you into something that you're not, right? Which is a sad realization, but they have no other choice, because they can't really identify with the humanity anymore, and they also can't exist on this world because they're monsters and they're infectious to people. So what's the best way for them to exist is just to leave. I don't know how they came to this conclusion, but that's what it is. And it's sad and heart-wrenching, but, I'm going to say this up front. How this series wrapped up was really lame to me. It felt very lackluster given all of this major build-up, especially with these 2 previous episodes kind of building on the expository information and getting you kind of hyped to see where it's going to go. And to see such a lackluster finale just really bummed me out about it. First and foremost, when we're dealing with all the side plots from the previous episodes that are supposed to wrap up in this final episode here, there's really no resolution whatsoever with any of the core teen cast, to be honest. And it puts into perspective that really the main story here is supposed to revolve around Anthony Brewer and Detective Diaz, and not so much the teens. But it puts into perspective all these things that the show has been trying to build and just never wrapped up for the audience. Like, does Devin and Frankie finally get a chance at a relationship? We don't know, because the show ends before we get to that point. For Frankie, does she get art school money? Does she contemplate on actually still leaving Trey for a better guy? We don't know. Trey seems changed, and he, ironically, is the only person with some weird resolved arc. But even then, I don't think him and Frankie ever hashed out what actually happened with the car and him coming to grips with that. In the final few episodes, we're trying to build that up. We don't get any resolution with that. With Cece and I guess Alex, we see them share a kiss and a love connection, I think in episode 6 or 7. But in terms of Cece, like coming back on top and bouncing back from her anxiety attack previously and getting into college and all that, we never get resolution with that. With Alex getting revenge on this guy who got her put in juvie to begin with, that episode 3 tried to build up as a major plot point, we never get any resolution with that either. We don't get any follow-up with Detective Diaz and her daughter's relationship, and how essentially she's covering for her, and we never actually get resolution with Diaz and her toxicity that we saw in the flashback episode with the found footage stuff. We never see her and her high school boyfriend, who is Anthony's older brother, connect over that and, hash that stuff out. It all feels so weird, right? And when you put that aside, right, and you look at how climactic this finale is, we see these body squeezers knockoff things coming to the forefront near the back half of the episode, where there's only like 20 minutes left. And the only things we get are transformation scenes, in scenes where these body squeezers look like they're knocked down pretty easily and they're taking the kids off screen back to the bunker to be assimilated, right? It's really lame. And the CGI transformations are very hit or miss with certain characters. Specifically with the doctor with the gray hair's father, that transformation scene looked absolutely awful. It was awful. It was almost as bad as the Haunted Mask transformation scene from season 1. That level kind of bad. I was just shocked by how bad that looked. But then another character later on, that transformation scene actually was cool looking because they put, I guess, more stock into that one. But still, like, the CGI is hit or miss with these creatures, and they don't really do enough with them to make me care, because they're going for the whole we're peaceful existing alien crap cliche that you see in a lot of alien media. But their design was cool, I would say. They just didn't do anything all too scary with them. And going back to like trying to figure out really what's going on with these aliens, when you really sit back and think about it, a lot of this stuff never gets wrapped up or made sense contextually. It's all implied to be that this alien spacecraft has some sort of mutagenic, symbiotic technology that's also organic, that can, make DNA helix and absorb genetic information and animate life and all of this. But at the same time, it can also possess a car and make it come to life. It can make you feel shell-shocked and, wipe your memory, but you can still remember it, according to Trey, who claimed he never remembered what happened after he touched the freezer in Brewer's basement, but he remembers being in the pod for some reason. Like, is it actually wiping your memory or just making you feel dazed in the moment? It can turn kombucha vomit into monster blood. I mean, this thing has an endless amount of abilities, but none of it's ever really expounded on, and they're kind of relying on the negligence of the audience to actually think on it, to make that passable, right? Because most people will probably chalk it up, oh, it's alien tech, right? It's an umbrella thing. It's just really lazy writing. It's really lazy writing. And, this brings it back to the point where I just have to think, because of this, how this episode ended up, I keep pondering on the wasted time we had with, especially episodes 3 and 4. The haunted car in Monster Blood, you really didn't need those episodes in this season. You could have just done the first 2, and then you could have done 5, 6, 7, and 8. That would have been 6 episodes, and that's basically all you need to know for the core story. The show just spends a lot of focus on side characters and relationship drama, and they almost feel like they impede on getting to what people come to this show for, I think, which is the horror and the core main story. It's not as uneven in distribution as a whole show compared to season 1, and I'll get into that in my whole series review, or season review for this season here by itself. But for this episode, it just brings all that stuff to light, right? It makes me feel like, okay, well, that was fine, I guess. And it doesn't leave you off with the greatest impression of this season. There's just so much to complain about with this episode. Even the way it's handled in its editing and how it lays out, trying to wrap up the story, it's just all mediocre. It's all mediocre. And it just sends home how rushed this final act really was. And honestly, I couldn't tell you if maybe the writers and producers felt uncomfortable, maybe because this is their first time dialing it back 2 episodes. Maybe they were kind of hoping they got that leeway to have some more room for it. But still, kind of like last season, it feels like they're just trying to rush to the finish line, and they just miss a lot of things that I think people feel compelled to know, because the show itself went out of its way to go on these detours with these things, and we never have any resolution with that. The monsters from the first 4 episodes, like the plant creature, the bulb monster, the haunted car, right? The car even, or the monster blood, they don't matter diddly squat by the end, right? It feels like all these monsters that they introduce and these aspects to these characters they introduce are just to temporarily plug them into a vehicle to give them the limelight so they have their own episode to their name. And then they can care less about developing them later on. because there's so much unresolvedness by the end, given it all, it's just really depressing to me. It's one of these episodes that I think will live in infamy when it comes to this show. I can already tell, talking with people on Discord, a lot of people feel let down by this episode, and there's a lot of divisive opinions on it. And for a finale episode, trying to release all the tension and be like the most compelling episode, and while it should be the most compelling episode, it just doesn't do it for a lot of folks. And I can totally see people who possibly were interested in this season kind of, falling by the wayside by the end of it here. And I've seen a lot of people say they were leaning in, like giving the season like a really high score, but then the finale happened and it dialed it back to, kind of average territory, which is kind of how I feel, to be honest. I mean, I was kind of with it in the first 2 episodes. And then once we get to this point, I'm just like, well, that was that, right? But as a finale, I guess it's fine enough. I was initially going to be more fair on it, but because it's kind of lame, to be honest, and there's a lot of less than desirable things that happen here, I'm more inclined to give this episode maybe a light decent or a high okay. I'm kind of leaning a 2.75 out of 5 stars to a 3 out of 5 stars. For those of you that don't know, I don't wear kitty gloves with this show because it's not made for kids. It's a young adult show. It's actually made for adults, I feel, that are predicating nostalgia on coming to watch this show. So I feel like I can lay into it a little more and be harsher on it than I could something made for kids. So with that, I'd probably give this episode maybe like a 2.75 out of 5 stars. I think it's definitely in the bottom 3 weakest episodes of this season. And I'm kind of baffled that it ended on this. But like I said, it wasn't like terrible or anything. It didn't make me hate this season. It was just really middling. It's just very mid. And that's just how I feel about this finale. But nonetheless, that's my thoughts on episode 8, aka Invasion of the Body Squeezers. Let me know down in the comment section, what did you think about the finale? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Were you mixed on it? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.